Our political insiders are here, and you can join the conversation, as always, on Twitter at FInsiders and at Harris Faulkner, hashtag FRW. John LeBoutillier, former Republican congressman for New York, is back from Thailand, a trip there that he took. Pat Caddell, a former pollster for President Jimmy Carter and Fox News contributor, and Doug Schoen, former pollster for President Bill Clinton and Fox News contributor as well. The gang's back together. So good to have you. First question. What is the significance of what we saw happen among the Republicans with regard to Benghazi this week?
Well, I think, Harris, that for the Republicans, this is doing what we've been talking about for a year and a half, which is making a systematic effort to figure out what happened, where the talking points came from, why we didn't have a military response, and most of all, where the president was during the initial hours after the attack. Harris, I don't like to use the phrase bottom line, but this is a bottom line initiative by the Republicans to do fact-finding. It's fraught with political peril, I'm sure we'll discuss.
Why, John, is the GOP finally going hard after these scandals, particularly this one?
I'd add one more thing on to Doug. Excuse my voice. Why the stonewalling by the administration? I mean, if an ambassador is murdered 6 weeks before our presidential election, you would think the president would want the sympathy of America to be with the administration. Instead of hiding, they hid right from the get-go everything. Hide, obfuscate, change the story. And we've been pounding on this, the three of us, you know, and the speaker finally came around.
Why now?
I think the last round of emails that came out forced his hand. He'd been getting a lot of pressure. Had 180 members of the House asking him to appoint it, and he finally said, I have to do it.
Pat, do Democrats boycott this thing?
Well, we're about to see they've made some demands, some of which they can't get, signing off on whether you can have subpoenas. They certainly can vote on it. But Trey Gowdy today, I thought, made it very clear that he wants a fair investigation. Going to Doug's point, which is we must, if this thing looks political and it's a bunch of Republicans doing, we'll get into what the RNC did, being political, the Democrats will withdraw, they'll claim a victory. What is disturbing most of all, and then I say this as a Democrat, is why no one in my party has felt the way some Republicans at least did in Watergate, that we deserve to know the truth of what happened. And I have heard more outrageous spin and lies about how there's nothing to know or whatever for the purpose of politics, just as I've heard on the other side, when it involves American security, a dead ambassador, dead Americans. It is outrageous about our political system.
You know, I want to just toggle now to Twitter, because Katie is writing, and this is one of the questions that if Americans could be with that select committee, I've seen over and over. I want to know why our military did not go in and save them or even capture the terrorists. Americans, we know from polling, have taken a great interest in knowing what happened because we lost an ambassador that night. But specifically, they want to know why our military wasn't engaged.
Let me speak to Katie's point, because it's a critical one. This is an issue of fact. General Lovell, when he testified before Darrell Iss's committee, said that we could have sent our troops in and made an impact. Others in the administration say that there was nothing that we could have accomplished by sending troops. It would have taken too long. It's a legitimate factual question that deserves being answered, considered from all perspectives, and I think Katie raises an issue that the Select Committee will take up.
But the real issue is why no one has been apprehended, no one has been punished. We know who did this for a long time, and the president said we would do something, and we haven't. There's so much being hidden and covered up in this that involves so many aspects of national security and American policy. But those fundamental questions and why there was no effort. You know, the question is, the president, one place I know the president wasn't that night was in the Situation Room. And you would think, you know, we just get down to fundamentals. He went to a fundraiser the next day. What was he doing that night?
You know, I want to press in on that a little bit, because I was asked recently as a journalist what would be a question that you would ask if you could interview members of the Select Committee before they would gather. And I listed that among my questions. And people said, well, why is that important? Because when there were times, we know, when things were done in the national security interest of this country, the president was in the Situation Room. We know that because there are those photo ops. So with this particular taking out of an ambassador, that's somebody who is walking out democracy around the world, what we stand for in other parts of the world. Where was the president if not in the Situation Room? John?
Well, maybe we'll find out. And maybe we'll find out what was the CIA doing in Benghazi. Why have 30 CIA people been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements?
Is that normal?
No. And they are not allowed to talk to Congress or the media, and they get polygraphed every month to make sure they're not talking.
And one would hope that in this investigation, those people would finally be called and subpoenaed to testify, because never in this country, could you imagine Richard Nixon could have gotten away with suppressing people from testifying or talking to anyone about Watergate? And, you know, I mean,
he sort of tried, Pat.
He tried. Well, he had an enemy.
We've mentioned Watergate a couple times. I want to echo Pat. I watched Congressman Gowdy this morning with Chris Wallace, because I was very concerned. I don't, as a Republican, want this investigation to be seen as a political witch hunt, right? What they did in Watergate, the Democrats were smart. They picked two elderly senior congresspeople, Sam Ervin, Peter Rodino, who were very partisan, but they didn't act partisan. They were genial, elderly guys who seemed fair. And Darrell Issa has screwed Benghazi up terribly.
Well, wow, that's one thing to say about a member of your own party.
But he's been terrible. And that's one of the reasons that Boehner did this, was to get this thing away from Issa. And he gave it to a young second-term congressman who, out of the blocks on today's show, did a good job.
You're talking about Trey Gowdy.
Yeah,
well, he's also a veteran prosecutor. I want to get this in. Roger Barnhout says on Twitter, if Democrats fail to participate in Benghazi Select Committee, to us Americans, it shows a sign of guilt for a cover-up. This is Roger Barnhout. Yeah. Your response?
My take is that could well be the case. If the Republicans do a fair-minded, factual inquiry without political spin, yes, it could redound to the Democrats' detriment. But with the Republicans having started fundraising from the day the committee was announced, that's a mistake.
All right, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. John, I want to get you in here, but I also want to hear from Representative Trey Gowdy from earlier today. So let's watch that, and then I'll get your response.
For me, I will not raise money on Benghazi, just like I never raised money using crime victims when I was a prosecutor. And I've asked my colleagues to follow suit, but it would be helpful. It would be helpful if our colleagues on the other side of the aisle did not have selective amnesia when it comes to what's appropriate to raise money off of and what is not.
Wow, this really is kind of getting off topic here, John LeBoutillier. What's happening with this?
You know, there's a phrase, having a political tin ear, which bad politicians have this trait where they just don't connect. And I saw it the other day when this thing came out, and they asked the speaker 3 times at a press conference, and he wouldn't answer it about the fundraising. What he should have said is, I'm the top Republican in Washington, and by the time this press conference is over, that fundraising is stopping, and there'll be no more of it. And here we are Sunday, and I haven't heard yet that it's stopped.
Pat?
Well, it just goes to show you there's no group that can destroy their opportunities more than Republicans. I swear to God, it's like they form a circulating firing squad. Yeah. Absolutely. How dumb, how outrageous. The reason if we had not waited a year and a half and done what we talked about, the Darrell Issa thing, which, you know, and how badly he handled this, which you were saying, John, and the fact that you couldn't, as we said from the beginning, you never could get the consistent fact-finding that Doug's pointing out without a committee. Boehner does that, and then he he sits on his hands on that. And then when this fundraising, of all the things not to do, which we said a week ago, is make this political. You just play in the Democrats' hand. The problem in Washington is both parties care nothing except about politics.
All right, people are furious right now, at least some of them on Twitter. They're saying this is political, though. This is already political, that the Republicans are not making it political. Democrats have done this, too, in the past.
That is Pat's point, and that's absolutely correct. But there's a larger political narrative here. Yes, you want to do what's right, and we're suggesting, all of us, that should happen. But the Democrats will argue if fundraising continues, if it becomes a game of political gamesmanship, rhetorical excess, and the like by the Republicans. The Democrats will say we're concerned about unemployment, implementing the Affordable Care Act, and all the Republicans do is play politics. It's what we did in 1998 over the impeachment. That's the real challenge.
All right, bottom line this for me, though, because going forward, if the goal is to find out what happened that night in Benghazi, Libya, you have 7 Republicans that are ready to do it. And if the Democrats don't want to take a part, I remember a former select committee that had 9 Democrats on it, right? And only 3 Republicans. This is going to be 7 and 5.
The Democrats are going
to
So
why are they balking?
They're unsure of what to do, but they're going to do it.
They can't afford
and
not
the
to.
bottom.
What was that, Pat?
I don't think they can afford not to. I didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
Well, I was just going to say there are 2 key words here. Fair. The American people will know if this thing is fair or not. If it's rigged, it's ruined. If it's fair, it'll go somewhere. And the second one is, what's the truth?
What's the truth? All right.
Something said from the beginning. Yep. That is the issue. These dead Americans, for God's sakes, the American people deserve to know the truth. And for those people in the mainstream media and members even in my own party who keep saying no one cares, I'm telling you, half the Democrats want this to happen.
All right. Our viewers are concerned about your voice, John LeBoutillier.
It's okay.
Take some honey and water while we're in commercial break. We're looking ahead to the midterms and beyond. New polling shows many Americans are angry. Why? Let's start with a trend that you say you're starting to see, Pat.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is the Republicans are leading. 2 things are happening. One is they need 6 net seats because they lost 2 in 2012. Let us never forget how much they can screw this up. But they need 6 seats. They've got at least that many in serious contention to take from the Democrats. There are seats in play that no one expected ever to be in play, like in Oregon, Michigan, Colorado is in play, Iowa. All of these states, and it basically is a question of tide. Now, the establishment Republicans have done everything they can to squeeze out the Tea Party crazies. And there are some crazies, like in, I won't say names or whatever. But at the same time, what they're also doing is running the worst kind of establishment candidates in some cases I think you can run, which are straight politicians.
All right. I don't like to call people names. So if you want to refer to the Tea Party, I'm cool with that. But I do want to press in a little bit, John. When you alienate one group, particularly the Tea Party, you're talking about a younger demographic there, too. Can the Republicans afford to do that?
It would be better not to alienate them because they have the energy in the party.
Exactly.
And what's happening, I think, in America today, the passion differential is on the favor of Republicans. Obamacare, jobs, sluggish economy. Now we could throw in Benghazi if you want. The IRS. Everything is bad. If you're Obama, then there's nothing to run on that jazzes people up on his side.
The Republicans, John. And that's why the prior conversation about Benghazi is so important. The Democrats' best argument is, as Pat and John have said very clearly, is that the Republicans are overreaching, playing politics, and are the party of no.
All right, Pat, let's take a look at that statistic that I know you and I were talking about during the commercial. Can we put up those numbers on that polling that shows how people say they'll vote in November? And they identify the president in this question. Will your vote send a message to the president? And if so, how so? Message of support, 24%. Message of opposition, 30%.
Yeah.
Why is that critical?
That means 1 out of every 3 voters, so they're going there to vote against the president. Let me tell you something. always in an off-year election, and I think Doug and John would back me up on this, the instinct to vote no, because I don't like something, is a lot more compelling for voters to turn out than the vote to say, well, I'd like to approve something. And, you know, but Doug is absolutely right. 98 is a perfect example of that with impeachment, where the Republicans overreached so badly that they took a situation that they could not lose and then lost seats. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but in the House, but in these Senate races, it matters. And again, it's back to Doug, the point Doug was saying to John. It's, you know, these people, the Republicans, need to also stand for something. And so far, they're still short on that when it comes to Obamacare and the economy. Two issues that should really work, will probably work for them.
It's interesting to see then the timing of the Republicans getting tough with these scandals. And it might play well into what you're saying in terms of shoring up some of that base. I'm looking at the Twitter machine, as my mom would call it. Cotton says, if Representative Gowdy does not go after them vigorously over Benghazi, I, as conservative, may sit out in November.
That is the challenge. The Republican Party has to keep itself together. The right wing of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, wants zealous advocacy. The broad mass of the electorate in the middle wants fair and balanced politics and investigations. Keeping the party together, avoiding a schism, is the real challenge, Harris.
Looking ahead 2016, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida was asked today in an interview whether or not he considers himself ready to run. He says there are a lot of people who are. He considers himself ready. And then he said this, watch.
If I decide to run for president, I will not have some sort of exit strategy to run for the Senate. You don't run for president with some eject button in the cockpit that allows you to go on an exit ramp if it doesn't work out.
So there he is.
Let me ask you something. In hundreds of interviews with Reagan when he was running, do you think he ever talked about political strategy? Never. He talked about, here's what we have to do to make the country work better.
He was asked about it in his defense.
Now, you got to use your airtime to talk big issues, not about yourself.
Are you giving free advice to Marco Rubio on Fox Report tonight?
We are, absolutely. We tell candidates never talk about political strategy or the polls when you get asked.
That's right, never.
Okay, Doug, I'm glad to hear that.
That's true.
By the way, I want to make a comment. Rubio, I want to say something because I want to make sure that people didn't misunderstand my comment. I was very flippant. The Tea Parties have put up not ready for primetime players, to say the least. Marco Rubio is an example of the exact kind of Tea Party candidate who defeated the Republican establishment, Charlie Crist, who's now running as a Democrat, having passed as an independent, who actually succeeded. But I want to go back to the last point on Benghazi. Let me say this to Mr. Cotton, who asked the question. If I believe with my whole heart, if these Republicans will simply gather the facts, it will be devastating. Let the connect the dots, let the American people draw the conclusion, and that is what Barack Obama has every reason, and my party, I'm afraid, to fear, because this is not good stuff there.
Real quickly, people on Twitter are reacting to your comments about those who could testify being kept from doing so. Right. Real quickly, just a response.
Well, I think that's part of this committee's charge, is to have subpoena power to make all people come.
They need a chief counsel who knows how to do this job.
Including the National Security Advisor, John Donlan.
Thank you. That is how Fox reports. Happy Mother's Day to my mom and others.